So there are three important moves in writing an introduction. So the first move is you have to establish your research territory. Now, you don't want your readers to get lost while reading your introduction. There are a lot of topics that you could possibly talk about within a research area, but you have to specify and direct them to the problem that is being addressed. So the first move is you have to show your research area how the problem is relevant to the community, why is it important to be addressed, and how problematic is the problem that it needs answers from you. Like, why is it important for you to solve this problem? I mean, why is this problem worth both the researcher's time as well as the reader's time? So you have to show it in the introduction. And you have to establish your research at the front line of that field, of that research area. For example, your research area is about COVID-19. So let's say you invented a hand wash that targets specifically the COVID virus. Okay, so you have to tell the readers that it's very important and it is very urgent because we have this pandemic going on. So the next step would be for you to introduce and review previous researches. Now, this is what makes the IMRAD format different from the traditional formatting in such a way that the review of related literature is somehow condensed as a part of the introduction. Now, here in the IMRAD format, the RRL becomes a part of the introduction in such a way that it helps you to establish your territory among all other researches. Like among your peers, where is your research? So that's what you need to show in the introduction. You need to show where your research stands among the rest of the researches out there, because there are a lot of research about your topic. So you need to show what makes your research different, and that's establishing your research territory. So after establishing a research territory, the next move would be for you to establish a niche. So in your science subject, right, there's the ecosystem and there's an organism's niche. Like for example, a plant's niche is for it to be a producer, while the caterpillar's niche is it's a consumer, that it consumes the leaves of the plant. So in the same way, there's a whole ecosystem out there of researches. Now you have to position your research within a certain niche. So what you can do here is you have to show to the readers how can it contribute to the whole ecosystem of other researches. So you have to show how can it be useful and how it can contribute to other researchers that will be reading your research report in IMRAD format. Now, the first step in establishing a niche is, number one, to mention what is lacking in the existing research. Now, there is a vast resources of every research under your research area or under your field of interest. Now, you have to find out what is lacking in other researches so that you can find out what can you contribute to that ecosystem. And then the next part would be for you to highlight a gap in the field. So this adds to the relevance of your research in such a way that when you indicate what is lacking in the current resources, so you can highlight more on what can you contribute. Step 3 is for you to raise a question where research in the field is unclear. So your research could be about clarifying something or debunking a certain myth, debunking a certain scientific concept. So that's what can you contribute. So it shows that your research is relevant, or it's not just repeating the same concept all over again, but it has something to offer. So with that comes step 4, wherein you should actually contribute your idea that is additional to the field. Because if you keep on repeating the same researches as what other people did, then your research becomes irrelevant. And also why it's called research, because we repeatedly search for something, for new knowledge. Because why should we repeat our search if there's nothing new to discover or there's nothing new to find out? So after you have established a niche, you have to occupy that niche. You have to situate your research in such a way that you show the reader that this is the niche, that this is how my research can be useful to other researchers. You have to actually give them the facts that this is your niche. You can't just declare that this is the niche, but you also have to occupy them. I mean, the caterpillar cannot show other people that it's a consumer if it doesn't consume anything, or a plant cannot occupy the niche of being a producer if it can't actually produce food for other animals, right? So you have to show that your research is useful, that your research really has something to offer. So this is the third part, or the move 3 that you should do. So step 1, you have to outline your purpose and state the nature of your research. So this comes more of a summary or an overview of your entire research. So you have to state your purpose and state the nature of your research. And you also have to include the hypothesis and the research question. So this is what makes it different from the traditional format, because if you can remember, right, in the introduction, in the traditional format, the introduction is split into the background of the study, statement of the problem, significance of the study, research questions, statement of the problem, hypothesis, right? Now here in the IMRAD format, it's actually condensed into one part, which is the introduction. But you still have to state your hypothesis and your research question. Right? And then step 3 would be for you to share your findings. So it's very different from the traditional format because you actually have results here. Before, you don't have results yet. So you have in the introduction, in the traditional format, you just write theoretical, it's more of a theoretical approach. But here in the IMRAD format, it's already finished. The research is already finished, so you already have your result, and you have to include them in the introduction. So that's step 3. And step 4 would be to outline the structure that your research paper would follow. So this is like a table of contents, but in statement form, but in sentence form, and it's very brief. So like it just follows how your research paper would progress from that point. And that's it for the 3 moves in writing an introduction. After you followed everything and maybe just write 3 to 5 sentences for every step, then you already have an introduction. You're finished with the introduction. So to put it in a summary, the 3 moves: first, move 1, you have to establish a research territory. I mean, among all other researches, what makes your research different? So that's like establishing a research territory. Then the next move would be for you to establish a niche. So what good is your research? What can it contribute? Why is it useful? And where does it stand among all other researches? I mean, is it the best or is it the worst research? Or is it so-so? So you have to show to the reader what can it offer, right? And then move 3 is for you to occupy that niche. So this is the part when you give them facts, you give them the results, wherein this is what can I offer. You give them solid facts about your research. Alright, so for example, let's talk about the global pandemic in COVID-19. So let's say you've created a soap that kills 99% of germs, including viruses, including COVID-19. So it's a hypothetical example. So how would you introduce that? So first, you have to establish a research territory. Now, your territory should be about COVID-19, or should I say infectious diseases, or epidemiology, or it could be soaps, right? You can choose a research territory, whether it's in chemistry, about the chemistry of soap, or should it be about COVID-19 and infectious diseases. Of course, the urgency should be the urgency would be the global pandemic. So the focus of your research or your research territory should be about COVID-19 rather than the chemistry of soap or a new brand of soap, right? So that's establishing a research territory. You need to show how problematic is your research and how relevant it is to the community. Alright, and that's what makes your research different from all other researches. So for example, now the next step in move 1 is for you to introduce and review other people's researches. Now this is positioning yourself in that territory. Okay, so for example, there's a research that studies about that a certain soap that reduces the transmission. It doesn't kill the virus, but it reduces the transmission. So with that, you can leverage that research to make your research more relevant, because your research hypothetically actually kills the virus, right? And that's how you can establish your territory. Like, this is my research, this is what it can do, this is what it can be, this is what it is. Alright, and with that, it can transition easily to establishing a niche in move 2. So move 2 would be establishing a niche, and then step 1 is for you to show what other researches are lacking. So what is lacking with the facts that we have, with the concepts that we have about COVID-19 and soap. Alright, so you have to indicate what is lacking with other researches. Like, this is what makes your research new or fresh rather among all other researches, and that's establishing a certain niche. Like, there is a position for your research to be read, right? And furthermore, after indicating what is lacking, step 2 would be to highlight a gap in the area, in the field of interest. So where is the gap between the existing data or the existing researches about COVID-19, and where can your research fit into that gap? You have to indicate whether your research can fit into a certain gap. So that's what you have to point out in the introduction. Alright, so the next step would be for you to raise a question about something that's unclear. So but still related to your research. Okay, I mean, for this example in COVID-19, right, there are a lot of things that are unclear, but still you have to relate it to your research. I mean, in this case, research about the COVID-19. Alright, so in raising a question, let's say for example, the question would be comparing with other researches, with research 1, let's say research 1, the soap that prevents transmission compared to your soap that kills the virus, hypothetically. Alright, so you have to raise a question about what is unclear in your field of interest. So let's say, for this example, let's say COVID-19 and a certain brand of soap or a certain soap that you have discovered, right? So there is a certain question that is still unclear in that research area that your research can answer. So for example, your data is all about the percentage of how much of the virus is killed after washing with soap. Right, so maybe you can raise a question in that research area as to how much virus or what percentage of the virus can be removed by hand washing with soap. Right? So that's the third step, and the fourth step would be to indicate what can your research contribute, to actually give an idea, a straightforward statement of what your research can actually contribute to that niche, to that position. So this niche is what actually makes your research a priority among all other researches. So you have to answer that in your introduction. You have to answer the question, why should I prioritize your research? What can your research give? So in connection to that, let's move to move 3, which is occupying that niche. So if people actually saw the relevance and the potential of your research, then you have to push through with it. So move 3 is actually pushing through with what you are saying. It's not just a theoretical thing, or it's not just a hypothetical basis, but you have to actually a fact, a hard, solid evidence that you can give. So this is what makes it different from the traditional format, because your traditional format in introduction, it's all just a theoretical concept. But in the IMRAD format, you're actually finished. The notion is you're actually finished with your research, and in the introduction, you are introducing the entire research, not just the topic. You're actually introducing already the findings and the result. And here in move 3, it's actually a make or break kind of moment. When your reader read this part, you actually have to get their attention in such a way that they would read all the way to the conclusion. So this is more like convincing your reader that your research is worth reading all the way to the findings. Alright, this is what makes, this is more like evaluation of your research. You have to show the reader that your research is valuable by occupying the certain niche that you have mentioned in move 2. Alright, so how can you show your reader that you have actually occupied that niche? So we have the move 3, right? So the first step in move 3 is for you to outline the purpose of your research. Again, to reiterate or re-mention the very purpose of your research and the nature of the problem. And then the next one is for you to state your hypothesis. Now, if your reader find out that your hypothesis, that there's something wrong with your hypothesis, that it is wrong to begin with, then he or she wouldn't waste his or her time in reading your research all the way. So this is a make or break moment for you, for your research. Alright, and then after the hypothesis, you have to write your findings already. Now this is what makes it different again from the traditional format. Now the inbred format is actually a summary of the entire procedure of your research. You're finished with your research, so you can indicate your findings in the introduction, but you don't actually mention every detail about the findings. It's just a brief summary of the findings just to show the reader what they are expecting. This gives them ample time to assess whether your research is worth reading all the way to the results and findings. And speaking of expectations, the next step would be to outline the structure of your research. This gives the reader an idea on how your research will move forward from that. So it's actually just a table of content in sentence form. So let's say, for example, here we introduce the problem, and then the next part would be the materials and methods, and then the results, wherein we would describe how our data, and we would mention all the outliers in our data, and then the next part would be this discussion, and then after that the findings, and then the recommendations. And that's it for that last step. And that's it for the 3 moves that can be used in writing an introduction. And if you follow those 3 steps and maybe write a 3 to 5 sentences, then you already have your introduction.